Welcome everyone, it's me, Maximus. Hope you're having a wonderful day. You know, these are scary times for any soldier in the common battlefield, especially the infantry, considering the amount of weapon systems that are available to unfortunately potentially take your life. When you look at the technology that's being invested into weapon systems nowadays, a lot of automation, a lot of high-tech weaponry that is really going well beyond the means of what we could ever imagine being placed against one another on the battlefield itself, whether it be high-tech optics, automated systems, robots, active protection systems. The world is just covered in companies trying to produce technology that really goes beyond the normal limits of what vehicles and weapon systems can do. Now, what we're looking at right now is a Crow system, very similar to other sort of remote weapon systems around the world that are being used. Is a 50 caliber machine gun being mounted into a basically a auto or manual controlled turret. Now, the system itself is nothing new. We've seen these around for quite some time. This one is particularly pretty. Looks like it's been really sort of pushed into the boundaries of, you know, modularity and looking very clean and sharp, whereas the reality is that this is just a standard 50 caliber machine gun placed onto an automated turret. Now, the 50 cal, as we already know, and I've done videos on it before, is a very prominent weapon, and it can do a lot of damage, as can other Soviet or other kind of old-school weapon systems brought from the Russian era, whether it be the Dushka or, you know, other weapons like the Cord. We know they are fantastic weapons platforms, but when it comes to real firepower, we're looking at 25mm, 30mm, 40mm, 50mm. The new gun systems that are coming out today are absolutely extraordinary in terms of what kind of capabilities they have on the battlefield. Now, this is a new concept, really, for the most part, for placing on more lightly skinned or lightly armored vehicles. We see most of these weapon platforms placed onto heavily armored vehicles such as the Bradley, the Lav, you know, BMPs, more sort of tracked, heavily armored vehicles. However, the trend is changing, and the way on which these weapon systems are actually being used is totally changing, for the fact that they've said, you know what, why are we putting these big guns on huge vehicles? Why can we not implement them into a more compact style onto smaller vehicles? Now, Bushmaster have done an absolutely outstanding job of producing very good chain guns, very good high caliber, high size caliber weapon systems to be placed on their armored fighting vehicles, whether it be, you know, single shot, fancy types of ammunitions coming out. There's all sorts of weapon systems they have available in their catalog, and they all have their own specific purpose. But what people are starting to realize is, you know, you don't need these massive chassis, these big platforms to put them on. You can put them on something as small as an ATV, and that's exactly what people are starting to realize and trying to do. Now, the technology out there for these, you know, ATVs is vast. There is a lot of different companies looking into investing a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of interest into making all-terrain vehicles, or ATVs, that are automated, can follow troops on the ground, can be placed into a fire support position. And to me, this is a bit of a game changer. It's a game changer because it must terrify infantry soldiers on the ground, knowing that it's not just the 50 cal, it's not just, you know, small arms like the 7.62, 5.56 that are coming for you. It's now embedded into infantry sections, potentially 30, 25mm, 40mm, 50mm guns that could in some regard be placed into a section level or platoon level or probably company level fire support role without needing heavily armored vehicles. They can be implemented into the section, the platoon. They can be put into an overwatch position and annihilate anything in its path. Now, the equipment that's being available for purchase right now, and that's going through a lot of trials and development, is implementing all spectrums of those high caliber weapons, from the 25mm, 20mm, 30mm. They're all being pushed out there. Now, I've done lots of videos on technology and automated, you know, robots and how they're going to start taking over the new battlefield, etc. You can go check them out if you want. I'll put them in the description box below. But this video is more pertaining specifically to why they are starting to put bigger guns on these things instead of just the standard 50 caliber that we're used to seeing, or even the 7.62 GPMG that we're used to seeing on these kind of systems. And the devastating firepower and effect that just one of these ATVs can produce and give the added value to a section commander on the battlefield. Some of these rounds and some of these projectiles that these weapon systems are firing can destroy an entire trench in a couple of seconds. An infantry section to take out a trench from distance can take hours if they're dug in heavily, if they've got a lot of indirect fire support, etc., etc. One of these vehicles placed in a tactically sound position and a good overwatch position can literally annihilate that entire trench position from at least 2 kilometers away within a couple of seconds. That's game-changing. Now, I know there's a lot of technicalities to bringing in this kind of technology. You've got to get the ammunition for it. It's got to be charged. It's got to, be robust enough to go across all sorts of conditions. It's a liability because you've got to carry and move this thing around if it fails. You've got to deny it if it blows up. It's mechanically risky. It's electronically risky. The weather conditions. There's a whole host of things that can get in the way of this thing being successful. But the interesting thing to me is it's stepping away from the need of infantry being reliant upon a infantry fighting vehicle or an armored personnel carrier that's loud, it's big, it's heavy. It requires just as much logistical infrastructure than any of the ATVs would need. However, it's with you. It's at the point of use right away. You don't need to call it in. You're not going to get dropped off like a battle bus and then it disappears, puts some rounds down range and follows you, down the road a little bit and then off it goes. Yes, I agree that infantry fighting vehicles are still the key to supporting any armored infantry unit. But when you put these kind of ATVs, these automated systems that can follow you around, and you put a huge weapon system on it that is similar to the IFV that dropped it off, that's insanely game-changing because you are able to knock out platoons worth of troops with this thing. And if things go wrong, it's going to be a lot cheaper to replace than an entire FV. You've also got to remember that this thing requires no driver. It requires no driver, commander, or gunner. So if you're going to put an IFV into an Overwatch position that can, totally engage trenches just as the ATV would, you put at risk your crew of that vehicle. It doesn't take much for RPG, Javelin, whatever it may be, some kind of ATGM, which again I've done many videos on the past, to knock it out. Now, yes, active protection systems are coming out there. They're there to protect our infantry fighting vehicles, our APCs, but the risk is still extremely high. IEDs, it doesn't take as much as a Molotov cocktail to knock out an infantry fighting vehicle nowadays if properly placed. Whereas these AGVs, if it hits an IED, it's just saved the lives of the whole platoon, the whole section, right, if it's ahead of you. If you place it into an Overwatch bounding position and it's giving you fire support from distance, if it gets knocked out with an RPG, okay, not a huge deal. $500,000-$600,000 down the drain. However, there's no crew members being killed. There's no flags that need to be sent to the soldiers' families. It is there to save lives as well as take them. It's preventing the need for troops to be put at risk. If you put a section or platoon of these things out, can you imagine the devastation they can do? Now, I know we've talked a bit about on my channel, the automation of warfare and how scary it can be, and Skynet and robots, etc., etc. Robots is really a touchy subject. We're talking about drones. We talk about the ethics of being able to use these kind of systems. Are you actually doing the deed, or is the robot, etc.? But in terms of other options that this thing can do, I really do think it's going to be a massive, massive thing that's going to start being implemented into the modern militaries around the world in the future, because it's not just these big old guns that can be put on it, which really is the focus of today, but it's putting mines to sleep, right? Mines out the way, pushing them out the way, busting doors down, creating bridges. These things can do a lot of different things than just engaging targets. Humanitarian aid, grabbing supplies. These things are carrying a ton of extra kit. Now there's so much more development that needs to be done on these things before they really become viable, I think, to the modern battlefield. I know I keep hashing out this kind of topic, but I truly feel that the infantry fighting vehicle may sooner or later just become back to being a normal APC. There may not be these huge requirements for anti-tank missile launchers on the top of them, big old Bushmaster chain guns on there. The Warrior's going to get its 40mm, the Bradley's getting its upgrade weapon system. All these new guns that, are being pushed out as the heavier caliber, the 50mm now they're looking at doing, which, by the way, looks outstanding. These guns can be placed in more numbers on these ATVs, but at section level, right beside the troops, that can move into a position quietly. You camouflage this thing up, it annihilates anything ahead of the troops, and the infantry mop up as they go. One of the really key things that people always say when they talk about, ATVs and putting these big old guns on them is, well, yeah, Matt, it's got to carry all the ammunition. Can you imagine how much that weighs? But things are changing, folks. We're not looking at the old school type of rounds anymore. We're talking about telescopic ammunition, caseless ammunition, stuff that is a lot less heavy and a lot more effective at what it needs to do. There's also some specific rounds that can be used on these kind of things too. It's not just AP, HE, or airburst. There's even more complex rounds coming out right now that can actually embed themselves into the dirt, sit there for a little while, and turn into almost like little miniature mines. incredible tech for the battlefield, and something that's definitely going to be, I think, more prominent as time goes by. We'll see even more fancy rounds, I don't know, rounds that program to engage aircraft, that can be, I don't know, we've got a lot of options with these kind of things. So ATVs with big old guns on them, what do you think? Do you think this is something that's ridiculous? IFVs should be the ones sticking around with the big guns, or the tanks. Of course, we're always going to have tanks with the main guns, but do you feel ATVs require these bigger guns on them? Do you think trucks, pickup trucks, armored personnel carriers that are a lot less armored require these bigger guns, or do you think they're going to be more of a hindrance? Do you think they're going to start turning into a bit of a specific target for assets that the enemy has? For instance, if you're seeing all these ATVs around, they're the first hit to go for with, say, gunships or indirect fire, because these ATVs are going to be a high risk for things like indirect fire, because all their hydraulics are exposed. To up armor these things would be impossible because the weight. They need to be battery powered or gas powered. It would be, I think, a lot of infrastructure to change an ATV to be relevant to stop RPGs or to stop indirect fire. You want to make them as lightweight as possible, that can quickly traverse across the ground and keep going all day long. Unfortunately, if you start adding more armor onto these things, it's just going to kind of defeat the whole purpose of having it at section level. You might as well just go back to being an infantry fighting vehicle or APC. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, everyone. Looking at this footage and looking at some of the things that these things can do is like, wow, you know what? This I really do feel is the future for not just the infantry, but the engineers, medics, logistics, even the armored corps, whatever it may be. These things are coming to the forefront, I think, of military technology, and I feel like, they're not being given enough justification. I feel like, a lot of trial and development's going into this, but militaries just aren't quite buying into it yet. They've done a lot of trials and development, but they haven't quite signed the dotted line. So you know what? We're actually going to invest an absolute ton of money into this and pump it into the program. DARPA in the United States have been pushing hard with, all this different kind of companies that produce these things, like General Dynamics, that produce the 50 caliber mounted MUT system, which is a really cool little bit of tech. They've done a lot of development with the Marine Corps. I've done some videos on that in the past too, but nothing really solidified. And I think probably in the next 5 to 10 years we will start to see these things being solidified into defense contracts and actually viable in the battlefield with troops on the ground. If you've ever used one of these, I would really love to hear from you. I would love to be able to play with these things with my service in the British Army, and I guarantee I'm never going to see anything like this in my service in the Canadian Army. It would be very nice to have, an ATV or an automated unit that could kind of ship ammunition back and forth on the gun line. It would be very useful. Maybe that's me just being a lazy gunner, I don't know, but it does make a lot of sense, especially for those using the 155mm gun platform. So folks, what do you think? Big guns on ATVs and these automated robot sort of 6x6 vehicles supporting sections, or no? Leave it for the big boys on the IFVs and do what they really need to do. I'd love to hear your opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave me a like, and if you want to see any upcoming videos from my channel, please feel free to hit the little subscribe button and the bell button beside there. If you want to support my Patreon account, please feel free to check out the description box below and click on the link. Any donations and support to there is truly appreciated, and I cannot thank you all enough for doing so. And all my other links for bits and pieces like merch and my CVRT crowdfund and stuff that's still going on, and thank you again for all donating towards that, it's really appreciated, is all in the description box. Go check it out. Thanks again everyone, and have a wonderful day. All the best. Bye bye.